Chapter 11 of The Beloved Vagabond by William John Locke. This Librivox recording is in the public domain. Recording by Simon Evers. Chapter 11. How far away it all seems. Paris. The Rue des Saladiers. The Atelier Janot, where the illustrious painter called us his children, and handed us the sacred torch of his art for us to transmit, could we but keep it aflame, to succeeding generations. The Café Delphine, with Madame Boin, fat, pink, urbane, her hair a miracle of perruquerie, enthroned behind the counter. My dear Master Paragot himself. How far away! It is not good to live to 150. The backward vista down the years is too frighteningly long. I found Paragot established as the dictator of the Café Delphine. No one seemed to question his position. He ruled there autocratically, having instituted sundry ordinances, disobedience to which had exile as its penalty. The most generous of creatures, he had nevertheless ordained that as dictator he should go scot-free. To have declined to pay for his absinthe or choucroute would have closed the Café Delphine in a student's face. He had a prescriptive right to the table under the lee of Madame Boin's counter, and the peg behind him was sacred to his green hat. To the students he was a mystery. No one knew where he lived, how he subsisted, what he had been. Various rumours filled the quartier. According to one, he was the Russian nihilist escaped from Siberia. Another, and one nearer the mark, credited him with being a kind of Rip Van Winkle, revisiting old student scenes after a 20-years slumber. He seemed to pass his life between the Luxembourg Gardens, the Pont Neuf, and the Café Delphine. Paris, he used to say, it is the Boule Mich. Although he would turn to the absolute stranger who had been brought as a privilege to his table and say, using the familiar second-person singular, "Buy me an evening paper," or, addressing the company at large, "Somebody is going to offer me an absinthe," and promptly order it, he was never known to borrow money. This eccentricity vexed the soul of the courtier, where the chief use of money is to be borrowed. To me, the idea of Paragot asking needy youngsters for the loan of 5 francs was exquisitely ludicrous. I am only setting down the impression of the courtier regarding him. Not only did he never borrow, but sometimes gave whole francs in charity. One evening, an unseemly quarrel having arisen between 2 law students from Auvergne, the Boeotia of France, and the waiter as to an alleged overcharge of 2 sous, Paragot arose in wrath, and, dashing a louis on the table with a "Hercule, paie-toi," stalked majestically out of the café. A deputation waited on him next day with the object of refunding the 20 francs. He refused, naturally, to take a penny. It would be a lesson to them, said he, and they meekly accepted the rebuke. "But what did you study here before you went to sleep?" an impudent believer in the Rip Van Winkle theory once asked him. "The lost arts of discretion and good manners, mon petit," retorted Paragot, with a flash of his blue eyes which scorched the offender. The students paid his score willingly, for in his talk they had full value for their money. I found the Café Delphine a lotus club, with a difference. Instead of being the scullion, I was a member, and took my seat with the rest, and, though none suspected it, paid for Paragot's drinks with Paragot's money. Our real relations were never divulged. It would affect both our positions, said he. To explain our friendship, it was only necessary to say that we had met at Budapest, where I had been sent to study with the famous Isolin, who is a friend of Paragot's. "My son," said he, "the fact of your being an Englishman who has studied in Budapest and speaks French like a Frenchman will entitle you to respect in the quartier. Your previous acquaintance with me, on which you need not insist too much, will bring you distinction." And so it turned out. I felt that around me also hung a little air of mystery, which was by no means unprofitable or unpleasant. To avoid complications, however, and also in order that I should have the freedom befitting my man's estate and my true education in the quartier, Paragot threw me out of the nest in the Rue des Saladiers, and, assigning to me a fixed allowance, bade me seek my own shelter and make my way in the world. I made it as best as I could, and the months went on. Why I should have been dreaming outside the Hotel Bristol that afternoon, I cannot remember. If to Paragot Paris was the Boulevard Saint-Michel, To me it spread itself a vaster fairyland through which I loved to wander, and before whose magnificences I loved to dream. Why not dream, therefore, in the Place Vendôme? Surely my aspirations in those days soared as high as the column, and surely the student's garb, beloved and ordained by Paragot, the mushroom-shaped cap, the tight-ankled, tight-throated velveteens, rendered any eccentricity a commonplace. Early spring, too, was in the air, which encourages the young visionary. Spruce young men and tripping modistes, with bandboxes under their arms, and the sun glinting over their trim, bare heads, hurried along through the traffic across the Place, and landed on the pavement by my side. I must own to have been not unaffected by the tripping milliners. Why should they not weave themselves into a painter lad's spring visions? Suddenly a lady, of so radiant a loveliness as to send modistes packing from my head, emerged from the Hotel Bristol and crossed the broad pavement to a waiting Victoria. She had eyes like the blue of glaciers, and the tenderest mouth in the world. She glanced at me. A floppy, picturesque Paris student, lounging spring-like in the Place Vendôme, is worth a fair lady's glance of curiosity. I raised my cap. She glanced at me again, haughtily, then again, puzzled, then stopped. "If I don't know you, you are a very ill-bred young man to have saluted me," she said in French. "But I think I have seen you before." "If I had not met you before, I should not have bowed. You are the Comtesse de Verneuil," said I in English, very boyishly and eagerly. The spring and the sight of Joanna had sent the blood into my pasty cheeks. "I once played the tambourine at Aix," I added. She grew suddenly pale, put her hand to her heart, and clutched at the bunch of Parma violets she was wearing. They fell to the ground. "No, no, it is nothing," she said, as I stepped forward. "Only a slight shock. I remember you perfectly. You said your name was Asticot. I asked you to come and see me. Why haven't you?" "You said I might come if I were in want, but thanks to my dear master, I am not." I picked up the violets. "Your master?" She looked relieved, and thanked me with a smile for the flowers. "He is well? He is with you in Paris? Is he still playing the violin?" "He is well," said I. "He is in Paris, but he only plays the violin at home when, as he says, he wants to have a conversation with his soul." The frost melted from her eyes, and they smiled at me. "You have caught his trick of talking." "You once called me an amazing parrot, madame," said I. "It is quite true." "In the meantime," said she, "we can't stand in the Place Vendôme for ever. Come for a drive, and we can talk in the carriage." "In the—" I gasped, stupefied, pointing to the Victoria. "Why not?" she laughed. "Do you think it's dangerous?" "No," said I, but she was already in the carriage, and, as I stepped in beside her, I noted the tips of her little feet so adored by Paragot. "I'm glad you're English," she remarked, arranging the rug. "A young Frenchman would have replied with the obvious gallantry. I think the young Englishman rather despises that kind of obviousness." The coachman turned on his seat and asked whether he should drive Madame la Comtesse. "Anywhere, I don't know." Then desperately, "Drive to the fortifications. Where the fortifications are, I haven't the remotest idea. I believe they are a kind of pleasure resort for people who want to get murdered. You hear of them in the papers. We'll cross the river," she said to the coachman. We started, drove down the Rue Castiglione, along the Rue de Rivoli, struck off by the Louvre and over the Pont Neuf. Standing in conversation with Joanna, I had the gutter urchin's confidence of the pavement, the impudence of the street. Seated beside Madame la Comtesse de Verneuil in an elegant Victoria, I was as dumb as a fish, until her graciousness set me more at my ease. As we passed through the quartier, I trembled lest any of my fellow students should see me. "Asticot, avec une femme de monde chic, il court les bonnes fortunes, ce sacre petit diable. Où l'as-tu pêché?" I shivered at their imagined ribaldries, and all the time I was athrill with pride and joy, suffused therewith into imbecility. Verily, I must be a monsieur to drive with countesses, and verily it must be fairyland for Asticot to be driving in Joanna's carriage. "That is Henri IV," said she, pointing to the statue as we crossed the bridge. "It was the first thing my master brought me to see in Paris, years ago," I said, with a very young's curious misrealization of time. He is very fond of Henri IV. Why? She asked. I told her vaguely the story of the Crusader's mace. She listened with a somewhat startled interest. I believe your master is mad, she remarked. Indeed, she added after a pause, I believe everyone is mad. I'm mad. You're mad. Oh, I'm not, I cried warmly. You must be, to set up a human god and worship him as you do your master. You are the maddest of all of us, Mr. Asticot. A touch of light scorn in her tone nettled me. Even Joanna should not speak of him irreverently. If he had bought you from your mother for £0.50, said I, and made you into a student at Janot's, you would worship him too, madame. I've been wondering whether you kept your promise to me, she said. I wish women were not so disconcertingly irrelevant. But now I am quite sure. Of course, I didn't tell my master, I declared stoutly. Good, and this little drive must be a secret too. If you wish, I said, but I don't like to have secrets from him. Give me his address, she said after a pause, and I noticed she spoke with some effort. Does he still go by that absurd name? What was it? His name is Basilius Parigot, and he lives at number 11, Rue des Saladiers. Do you know his real name? Yes, madame, said I. It is Gaston de Nerec. I only learned it lately through Monsieur Iselin. Do you know Iselin too? She asked. I explained my stay in Budapest. I also mentioned Monsieur Iselin's reticence in speaking of Paragot's early days. I think he was cautioned by my master. And who do you think I am? The sudden question startled me. You, said I, are Joanna. Indeed, how long have you known that, pray? When I came to you with the tambourine at Aix-les-Bains. I don't understand, she said, the frozen blue coming to her eyes. Did he tell you then, a child like you? He has never mentioned your name to me, madame, I said eagerly, for I saw her resentment. Then how did you know? I recounted the history of the old stocking. I also mentioned Paragot's appeal to me as a scholar and a gentleman. A wan smile played about her lips. Was that soon after he bought you for £0.50? Yes, madame, said I. And an old stocking? Yes, madame, and since then we have never spoken of the papers. But how did you know I was the Joanna of the papers? I guessed, said I. I could not tell her of the petit pied et si adoré. You are an old boy, she said. Tell me all about yourself. Unversed in woman's wiles, I flushed with pleasure at her flattering interest. I did not perceive that it was an invitation to tell her all about Paragot. I related, however, artlessly, the story of my life from the morning when I delivered my tattered copy of Paradise Lost to Paragot instead of the greasy washing book. And if my narrative glowed rosier with poetic illusion than the pages on which it had been set down, pray forgive 19 for seeing things in a different light and perspective from 150. In my description of the Lotus Club, for instance, I felt instinctively that Madame de Verneuil would wince at the sound of tripe. I conveyed to her my own childish impression of the magnificence of Paragot's bedchamber, and the story of our wanderings became an idyll of no-man's land. And what is he doing now? We had grown so confidential that we exchanged smiles. He is cultivating philosophy, said I. Perhaps it was a sign of my development that I could detect a little spot of clay in my idol. We had gone south, past the Observatoire to Montrouge, and had turned back before I realized that we were in the Boulevard Saint-Michel again, near the prearranged end of my drive. Do you know why I am so glad to have met you today? She asked. I think, indeed I know, I can trust you. I am in great trouble, and I have an idea that your master can help me. She looked at me so earnestly, so wistfully, her face seemed to grow of a sudden so young and helpless, that all my boy's fantastic chivalry was roused. My master would lay down his life for you, madame, I cried, and so would I. Even if I never in this world forgave him? You would forgive him in the next, madame, I answered, scarce knowing what I said, and he would be contented. The carriage stopped at the appointed place. I felt as if I were about to descend from the side of an Olympian goddess to sordid humanity, to step from the land east of the sun and west of the moon on to the common earth. It was I who looked wistful. "May I come to see you, madame?" A quick fear came into her eyes. "Not as yet, Mr. Asticot," she said, holding out her hand. "My husband is queer-tempered at times. I will write to you." The carriage drove off. For the second time she had left me with her husband on her lips. I had forgotten him completely. I stamped my foot on the pavement. "He is a scaly vulture," said I, echoing Paragot. Gods, how I hated the poor man! One evening, about a week after this, some 7 or 8 of us were gathered round Paragot's table of the Café Delphine. 2 were rapins. We have no word for the embryo painter. My companions in Jeannot's atelier. Of the rest I only remember one, poor Cazalet. He wore a self-tailored grotesque attire, a brown stuff tunic girt at the waist by a leathern belt, shapeless trousers of the same material, and sandals. He had long yellow hair, and untrimmed chicken fluff grew casually about his face. A sombre genius, he used to paint dark, writhing horrors of souls in pain, and in his hours of relaxation to drink litres of anisette. At first he disliked and scoffed at me because I was an Englishman, which grieved me sorely, for I regarded him as the greatest genius, save Paragot, of my acquaintance. I found him 10 years afterwards as sous-chef de gare on the Belgian frontier. It was about 11:30. Our table gleamed a motley wilderness of glasses and saucers. Only 2 other tables were occupied. At the one, 2 men and a woman played manille. On the other, a pair of players rattled dominoes. Madame Boin, sunk into her rolls of fat, drowsed on her throne behind the counter. Hercule stood by, his dirty napkin tucked under his arm, listening to Paragot's discourse. Through the glass side of the café one could see the moving, flaring lights of the Boulevard Saint-Michel. Paragot sipped absinthe and smoked his eternal pipe with the porcelain bowl, and talked. "The Courtier Latin? Do you call this bourgeois-stricken Akeldama the Courtier Latin? Do you miserable little white mice in clean shirts call this the Vie de Bohème? Is there a devil of a fellow among you, save Cazalet, whose chilblains make him indecent, who doesn't wear socks? Haven't you all dress suits? Aren't you all suffocating with virtue? Would any Marcel of you lie naked in bed for 2 days so that Rodolphe could pawn your clothes for the wherewithal to nurse Mimi in sickness? Is there a Mimi in the whole etiolated Courtier?" "But you, mon vieux," said my friend Bringard, who prided himself on his intimacy with life, "there are even a great many." Paragot swept his skinny fingers in a circular gesture. "Where are they? Here? You see not. It is a stunted generation, my gentle little lambs. What sacre nom de Saint Antoine!" he cried with one of his apposite oaths. "The very pigs in the good days could teach you lessons in the romantic. Vices you have, but the noble passions? No. Did you ever hear of the Café du Cochon Fidèle? Of course not. What do you know? It was situated in the Rue des Cordiers. Mimi la Blonde was a demoiselle du comptoir. Ah, bigre! There are no such demoiselles de comptoir now. Exquisite! Ah!" He blew a kiss from the tips of his long nails. "You are very impolite, Monsieur Paragot," cried Madame Boin from her throne. "Listen, madame," said he, "to the story of the pig, and you shall judge. The whole Courtier was mad for Mimi, including a pig. Yes, a great, fat, clean pig with sentimental eyes. He belonged to the charcutier opposite. I am telling you the authentic history of the Courtier. Every day the devoted animal would stand at the door and gaze at Mimi with adoration. Ah, but such an adoration, my children, an adoration respectful, passionate, without hope. Only now and then his poor, sensitive snout quivered his despair. Sometimes happier rivals with 2 legs, mais pour ça pour moins cochon que lui, admitted him into the café. He would sit before the counter, his little tail well arranged behind him, his ears cocked up politely, his eyes full of tears. He wept like a cow, this poor Nepomucene. They called him Nepomucene, and when Mimi looked at him, he would utter little cries of the heart like a strangulated troubadour. Ah, it was hopeless, this passion, but for 1 long year he never wavered. The courtier respected him. Of him it was said, "Love is given to us as a measure to gauge our power of suffering." Suddenly Mimi disappeared. She married a certain Godiveau, a charcoal merchant in the vicinity. Nepomucene stood all day by the door with haggard eyes. Then, knowing she would return no more, he walked with a determined air to the roadway of the Boul' Mich', and cast himself beneath the wheels of an omnibus. He committed suicide. Arago stopped abruptly and finished his absinthe. There was vociferous applause. I have never met anyone with his gift of magical narration. Hercule was summoned amid a confused hubbub and received orders for 8 or 9 different kinds of drink. We were fantastic in our potations in those days. "Ah," said Parago, excited as usual by his success. "Où sont les neiges d'antan? Where is the good Père Cordier of the Café Cordier? He would play billiards with his nose, and a little pug nose at that, my children. When it grew greasy, he would chalk it deliberately. Once he made a break of 245. A champion. The Café Cordier itself swept long ago into the limbo of dear, immemorable, dissolute things. Then there was the Café du Bastrin on the Boul' Mich', where Marie la Democrate drank 55 bocks in an evening against Hélène Lasèvre, who drank 53. Where are such women now? Oh, generation of slow worms! Where is—" He stopped. His jaw dropped. "My God!" he exclaimed in English, rising from his chair. We followed his gaze. Astounded, I too sprang up. It was the Comtesse de Verneuil standing at the doorway and looking in her frightened way into the café. Joanna, in dark-fitting toque and loose jacket, beneath which one saw a gleaming, high evening dress. I noted swiftly that she had violets in her toque. Her beauty, her rare daintiness compelled a stupefied silence. I sped towards the door and went with her into the street. A closed carriage stood by the curb. She took me by the front of my loose jacket and twisted it nervously. "Get him out, Mr. Asticot. Tell him I must see him." "But how did you come here?" I asked. "I went first to the Rue des Salariés. The servant told me I should find him at the Café Delphine." I left her outside and, re-entering, met him in the middle of the café, grasping his green hat in one hand and the pipe with the porcelain bowl in the other. All eyes were turned anxiously towards us. "She has come for you, master," I whispered. "She needs you. Come." "What does she want with me? It was all over and done with 13 years ago." His voice shook. "She's waiting," said I. I drew him to the door, and he obeyed me with strange docility. He drew a deep breath as soon as we emerged onto the wind-swept pavement. "Gaston." "Yes," said he. They remained looking at each other for several seconds, agitated, neither able to speak. "You were very cruel to me long ago," she said at last. My master remained silent. The wooden stem of the pipe snapped between his fingers, and the porcelain bowl fell with a crash to the pavement. "Very cruel, Gaston. But you can make a little reparation now, if you like." "I repair my cruelty to you?" He laughed, as men laugh in great pain. "Very well, it will be a fitting end to a topsy-turvy farce. What can I do for Madame la Comtesse?" "My husband is ill. Come to him. My carriage is here. Oh, put on your hat, and don't stand there French fashion, bareheaded. We are English." "We are what you will," said my master, putting on his hat. "At present, however, I am mystified by your lighting on me in the dustbin of Paris. You must have done much sifting." "I will tell you as we drive," she said. I walked with them across the pavement and opened the carriage door. "Good night, Mr. Asticot," said Madame la Comtesse, holding out her hand. Arago looked from me to her, shrugged his shoulders, and followed her into the carriage. My master had many English attributes, but in the shrug, the pantomime of Kismet, he was exclusively French. End of chapter 11.